Where do you want to be in 20 years?
The goal is to make a couple $2 billion in cannabis, give a bunch of it away, do some charity, spend more time surfing in Hawaii, and then I want to be president.
You want to be president of the United States?
Yeah, I think I can do it.
Where did Dan get his money from?
How, you may ask, does this billionaire playboy philanthropist finance his life?
You know, I beat one guy for 54 million. I mean, I won 10.5 in another night. I beat another guy for 10.
He claims to have won over $50 million in 1 year of playing poker.
He's the son of convicted corporate fraudster Paul Bilzerian.
The trust fund Ponzi scheme inheriting pseudo-commando wannabe Kirkland brand Hugh Hefner.
Paul Bilzerian, a Wall Street felon. I think Ignite is dead in the water. We're just waiting for the official announcement. They have no cash. They have no operations. Nothing is going on with Ignite. It's game over.
I went broke, so I was just like, it was a wild ride.
Dan Bilzerian, king of Instagram, the epitome of extreme extravagance, once the blazing dream of millions of men worldwide. Mansions worth millions, one-of-a-kind supercars, luxurious yachts casting shadows over the ocean, endless parties surrounded by stunning models, all crafted a Dan Bilzerian, who seemed to step out of a fantasy of opulence. To the public, he was a self-made millionaire, a poker genius who could pocket $10.8 million in a single night, the dazzling embodiment of the digital age American dream, wealth, power, absolute freedom, and always the center of every elite party. But then, that dream turned to ashes. Behind the blinding glamour and million-like photos lies a cold truth. Dan's wealth didn't come from poker tables, but from the towering shadow of his wealthy, infamous father. The self-made millionaire image was a meticulously staged script, a fairy tale that fueled illusions of an American dream that never existed. It didn't stop there. Suspicious spending, untraceable cash flows, and shady deals tied to his company, Ignite, drew the attention of authorities, from investigative reports to accusations by former associates. A grim picture emerged, one where Dan Bilzerian's empire stood on a precarious financial foundation. Then an FBI investigation revealed shocking details. The father who once propped him up was directly linked to the unraveling. This could be more than a sophisticated money laundering scheme. It might be a chilling betrayal or even a power game spiraling beyond control. A world where family, money, and power intertwined in a ruthless battle. What secrets behind the glossy facade pushed Dan Bilzerian's life into a dead end? And if this was all a power game, was Dan merely a pawn destined to be sacrificed? Today, we'll peel back the layers of Dan Bilzerian's mask, from the dark financial secrets of his family, the catastrophic business failures, to the moment his final glimmer of glory shattered completely.
So how did you make your money then?
Playing poker.
You made it all playing poker?
Yeah.
Wow, that is insane.
Dan Bilzerian's journey to becoming the king of Instagram began in the early 2010s, when he masterfully turned social media into a stage for a lifestyle both admired and envied. From his earliest posts, it was clear these weren't random snapshots, but meticulously staged scenes. A muscular, well-groomed Dan standing on the deck of a multi-million-dollar yacht, tossing cash from a helicopter, firing guns in the Nevada desert, or hosting lavish parties overflowing with models, champagne, and fireworks lighting up the sky. Every detail was calculated to portray an unstoppable alpha male, powerful, free, and untamed. For Dan, Instagram wasn't just a photo-sharing platform, it was a storytelling tool, a narrative of a high-rolling poker player and financially independent entrepreneur bold enough to live beyond all constraints. He frequently boasted about massive poker wins, claiming to have won $10.8 million in a single night, or earned over $50 million in a year. These figures, paired with his lavish imagery, painted a perfect picture of the American dream, where a self-made man could rise to the top through wits and daring. This persona quickly captivated the public, especially young men. They didn't just crave Dan's wealth, they were enamored with the absolute freedom he represented. No 9-to-5 job, no restrictive rules, just audacity, boldness, and a touch of luck to live like a king. His savvy engagement with fans, replying to comments, sharing poker moments with friends, and dishing out bold living tips made him relatable, as if anyone could become like him with enough effort. Dan's posts were flooded with praise, the man living the life everyone dreams of, or Dan, teach me how to live like you. At his peak, with over 30 million followers, he became an icon of dream success, an invincible standard of masculinity. But as the Instagram glamour began to fade, the poker community and media started questioning, was his self-made millionaire story actually true? Here, the first cracks appeared, setting the stage for the inevitable collapse of Dan Bilzerian's carefully crafted image. The doubts about Dan didn't come from the general public, but from the poker community itself. People who understand the cutthroat nature of high-stakes gambling, known for their caution and calculation, they quickly spotted holes in his story. They didn't believe Dan could win $50 million from poker, and when the evidence was pieced together, the picture became suspiciously clear. Dan's story is like a Hollywood movie, thrilling, captivating, but completely unreal. A poker journalist wrote on a niche forum, these inconsistencies not only shook his poker king image, but raised a bigger question. Was he truly the man he claimed to be?
I sold 3 guns for $750, played on this gambling boat for a week, turned it into 10,000, went to Vegas, and then turned that into 187,000 at Bellagio after playing for 3 weeks straight. Never forget it.
Dan always insisted his massive wealth came from private poker games, with billionaires and the ultra-rich games held in secrecy, with no audience, no rankings, and crucially, no public proof. "I don't play in big tournaments," he once said in an interview. "I prefer discreet games where you can make millions in a few hours." But this discretion became the problem. No major tournament listed his name, no reputable leaderboard recognized him as a top player, and no credible witness vouched for the legendary wins he claimed. The $50 million win story rests solely on Dan's word. Poker journalist Joe Stapleton wrote in a 2015 analysis, "It's one of the most blatant lies I've ever heard in the poker world." What made Dan's story most unbelievable was the extravagant lifestyle he flaunted. Multi-million-dollar Los Angeles mansions, Lamborghini supercars, yachts, private jets, endless parties with dozens of models, all required not just vast wealth, but a steady, continuous flow of it. How could someone spend millions annually from poker alone without leaving any trace? Experts estimate that sustaining such a lifestyle would require at least $15 million per year. Even the world's top poker players can't maintain that level of consistent income from poker alone. Poker is a high-variance game. You might win big today and lose everything tomorrow. With Dan's relentless spending, he needed a far more stable income source than poker could provide. This discrepancy led many to believe poker was merely a cover to legitimize his true source of wealth. When the story of winning $50 million from poker began to lose credibility, public attention turned to an aspect Dan Bilzerian never wanted to discuss: his family. And when that door opened, it revealed a shadowy financial picture, with money flows carefully hidden in corners most of the public would never see. Dan's father, Paul Bilzerian, was no stranger to America's financial world. In the 1980s, he was a notorious Wall Street shark, infamous for controversial corporate takeovers and buyouts. But his empire crumbled in 1989 when he was convicted of securities fraud for tactics like stock parking and greenmail. These schemes netted him tens of millions but led to a pursuit by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), which saddled him with over $180 million in debt. On paper, Paul declared bankruptcy, but to investigators, the story wasn't so simple. They believed he secretly moved hundreds of millions offshore, hidden in a complex web of trust funds in tax havens like the Cook Islands. A 1991 SEC report described him as a master of asset concealment, using sophisticated legal and financial structures to keep money out of law enforcement's reach. Many analysts believe these trust funds fueled Dan's lavish lifestyle. A 2018 source close to the matter revealed, when Dan turned 30, he began receiving regular payments from these funds. Turns out his wealth didn't come from legendary poker wins, but from money suspected to be his father's illicit asset.
The trust funds, I guess you were entitled to one when you turned 30, one when you turned 35. More or less than you had already made on your own?
I gave it all back, so.
Really?
Yeah. I gave it to my brother.
Why?
I don't know, I didn't need it, didn't want it, didn't care.
The suspicion about Dan's wealth thus went beyond debunking his poker story. It illuminated a covert financial mechanism designed to operate in the shadows. When piecing together the unverified poker claims and the mysterious financial network tied to his father, the family money theory became increasingly plausible. If Dan truly earned $50 million from poker, why never show a leaderboard, tournament certification, or any concrete proof? The simple answer: the money didn't exist. It was all a facade to mask funds from his father. Financial experts analyzing Dan's lifestyle noted a clear discrepancy. Multi-million-dollar mansions, luxury yachts, and endless cash-burning parties didn't align with even the best poker player's income. But they perfectly matched someone with access to a massive, legally shielded fortune. Was Dan truly a self-made entrepreneur, or just a puppet in a financial drama orchestrated by his father? Amid mounting skepticism, Dan didn't choose transparency. Instead, he either stayed silent or responded with defiance. In a 2016 Instagram post, he wrote, "Keep being jealous, I don't care. I'm living the life you only dream of." But rather than quelling doubts, this statement became evidence of his arrogance and lack of clarity. An ex-user fired back, "If you really made $50 million from poker, why not prove it? Silence or bragging doesn't prove you're clean." Worse, Dan's responses exposed a fatal flaw: insecurity that starkly contrasted the alpha male image he tried to project. Instead of addressing questions about his wealth's origins, he posted more flaunting photos as if new layers of glamour could bury old suspicion. But this only convinced the public further that it was all a meticulously staged performance to hide the truth. From an admired self-made millionaire, Dan Bilzerian is now labeled by many as a fake millionaire or trust fund kid, a product of a covert financial network rather than individual talent or effort. If doubts about his poker winnings were the first crack, the collapse of Ignite International Brands, Dan Bilzerian's company, was the bomb that obliterated his self-made entrepreneur image. Ignite, promoted as a business empire embodying Dan's ambition, was meant to prove he was more than just the king of Instagram, but a legitimate businessman. Yet within a few years, Ignite became a symbol of extravagance, deception, and catastrophic failure. The real world isn't as glamorous as Instagram photos. Dan's web of lies unraveled, and Ignite is the clearest proof. Undeniable truth emerged, confirming that it was all a grand performance to conceal the real source of his wealth and fame. Launched with big ambitions in January 2019, Ignite went public at $2.50 per share, leveraging Dan's King of Instagram fame to attract investors. Marketed as a premium lifestyle brand tied to Dan's lavish image, parties with models, yachts, and a carefree lifestyle, it was billed as more than a company, but a way of life. Ignite isn't just a business, it's a lifestyle, Dan proclaimed. But behind the glossy veneer, Ignite was a money-losing machine. Over $50 million vanished in its first year. Former employees revealed Dan didn't even lease the Bel Air mansion himself. Ignite footed the bill. Was Ignite a real business, or just a tool to sustain Dan's luxurious lifestyle? The answer emerged as internal documents and testimony from former President Curtis Heffernan surfaced. Dan used company funds for personal expenses, $60,000 for a Star Wars gun collection, $75,000 for a paintball field, $31,000 for pool renovations, and millions for yachts, models, and parties. Slap an Ignite logo on it, and it's instantly a company expense, an employee said. Many costs covered family, food, or lavish vacations. This isn't how you run a company, a financial expert noted. It's how you use investors' money to live like a king. The result was financial disaster. In 2019, Ignite spent $69 million but earned just $9.7 million. Its stock plummeted nearly 90% to 0.2. A brief 2021 recovery collapsed when the SEC sued Ignite for failing to provide documents in a fraud investigation. By 2022, Dan delisted the company without explanation, with Paul Bilzerian claiming it was to avoid maintaining a public company. To the public, this was the death knell of Dan's entrepreneur dream. Ignite's collapse exposed his Instagram lifestyle. The mansions, yachts, and models were mostly rented. Dan didn't own them, he borrowed them to create a fake dream, a critic said. The public, once in awe, turned to mockery, labeling him a trust fund kid living off his father's dirty money. This disillusionment deepened with the launch of Sigma Society, an online dating course promising to make men charismatic without money or look. It was quickly slammed as a scam, with generic content no better than free online advice. Priced at $200 a month but marketed as worth $4,000, it was called a smart marketing ploy exploiting insecure.
The thing I'm working on right now is a site where it's basically gonna like teach guys kind of like
Sigma?
With that, yeah,
Sigma?
Yeah, it's gonna like teach guys how to be guys. You know, I feel like this generation has kind of like lost that.
Amid the criticism, Dan made a shocking move. In 2021, he sued his father Paul for $50 million, claiming Paul misused his image in Ignite-related activities. Dan alleged his father and associates plotted to oust him as CEO while using his image to promote the company, blocking his new brand ventures. The lawsuit seemed an attempt to distance himself from his father's financial scandals, positioning himself as a victim. "I built Ignite from nothing," Dan posted. "I don't need my dad or anyone to succeed." But the strategy backfired, like a self-inflicted wound. The litigation exposed a web of financial ties between Dan and Paul, including trust fund transfers and Paul's role in Ignite decisions. This lawsuit was Dan shooting himself in the foot, a CNBC analyst remarked. Instead of proving his innocence, it reinforced suspicions he lived off his father's money. But it didn't end there. Ignite's suspicious spending, untraceable cash flows, and shady deals caught the authorities' attention. Investigative reports and former associates' accusations pieced together a grim picture. Dan's empire wasn't built on solid business but on a risky financial system, where real revenue was obscured by lavish invoices. The most shocking moment came when the FBI's investigation files were released. Among hundreds of pages, one detail stunned the public. Paul Bilzerian, once Dan's cornerstone, was directly tied to the unraveling. To many, this wasn't just evidence of a sophisticated money laundering scheme, but hinted at a cold betrayal, or worse, a power game spiraling out of control. In this game, family, money, and power intertwined in a merciless battle. The public speculated three scenarios. First, some believed they were accomplices, collaborating in a system to legitimize assets, with Paul controlling the funds and Dan as the front to access trust money. Second, others thought Dan went rogue, using company and family funds beyond limits, causing a risk. Third, a hybrid theory seemed most plausible. Father and son initially worked closely, but Dan's excessive image building and spending triggered legal risks and real conflict. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Dan couldn't escape his father's shadow. Paul Bilzerian was accused of manipulating the stock market, a Wall Street Journal article noted. Dan seems to have applied similar tactics, but in personal branding, hyping achievements, creating products from fame, and cycling money to sustain his lifestyle. Regardless of the scenario, the truth is undeniable. Dan couldn't break free from his father's shadow. The alpha male image is now just a thin disguise, a performance to hide his financial dependence and secrets he never wanted the public to know. So, after all the controversies and scandals, what lessons does Dan Bilzerian's story leave us with? Once hailed as the king of Instagram, Dan built a dazzling image of wealth, power, and absolute freedom that captivated millions. With photos showcasing multi-million-dollar mansions, supercars, yachts, and lavish parties, he didn't just sell a lifestyle, but a dream of a life that transcends all limits. However, when the curtain of glamour was pulled back, his journey from the pinnacle of fame to the abyss of skepticism and ridicule is not just a personal story, but a warning about the traps of the digital age. His story offers profound lessons about the true value of success, integrity, and the cost of living in illusion. The power of personal branding is something Dan Bilzerian understood better than anyone. He turned Instagram into a stage where every post was meticulously crafted to portray an invincible alpha male. From images of standing on yacht decks to tossing money from helicopters, everything was calculated to tap into the public's deepest desires. But this reliance on image became a double-edged sword. When the truth about the origins of his wealth was exposed, the public realized that what they admired was merely an elaborately staged performance. Success doesn't lie in likes or attention, but in the real impact you create. A meaningful business, a creative idea, or a kind act holds more value than thousands of glamorous photos. In a world easily dazzled by appearances, focusing on creating sustainable value is the only way to build a legacy worth celebrating. Moreover, Dan's story underscores the importance of self-awareness. He seemed unaware or deliberately ignored that his self-made millionaire image was riddled with flaws. His repeated claims of winning tens of millions from poker, though unproven, were stated with unwavering confidence, as if arrogance could conceal the truth. His reckless spending of Ignite's company funds further revealed a lack of self-reflection about his actions. Understanding your strengths, weaknesses, and limits is key to avoiding catastrophic mistakes. A person who honestly assesses themselves not only makes better decisions but also earns respect from others. Dan's complacency, in contrast, propelled him into a spiral of poor choices, ultimately toppling the personal empire he worked so hard to build. The collapse of Ignite International Brands is clear evidence of Dan letting fame overshadow responsibility. Instead of building a sustainable company, he used corporate funds to bankroll his lavish lifestyle, from yachts and parties to absurd personal expenses like toy guns or a paintball field. These actions not only harmed investors but also destroyed the trust of those who once supported him. When you hold a position of influence, every decision impacts others, from employees to the community. Prioritizing responsibility over personal desires is the mark of a true leader. Dan instead chose to spend to maintain his image, and the price was the collapse not only of Ignite but also of his personal credibility. Another aspect of Dan's story is his dependence on money from his father, Paul Bilzerian, a notorious Wall Street shark. Despite crafting a self-made image, Dan actually lived off trust funds allegedly set up by his father. Funds with questionable origins. This dependence made him a puppet in a larger financial game where he lacked true control. Autonomy, whether financial, emotional, or reputational, is the foundation of real freedom. When you rely on others, you lose the ability to shape your own life. Building personal capabilities, from skills to independent resources, is the only way to live a truly independent and meaningful life, free from invisible strings. When faced with criticism, Dan often chose to dodge or respond with arrogance, posting more lavish photos as if they could erase doubts. But this strategy only deepened public distrust. Failure is inevitable, but how you handle it defines who you are. Admitting mistakes, learning from them, and taking action to correct them are signs of maturity. Instead of hiding or blaming others, facing the truth honestly not only helps regain trust, but also creates an opportunity to build a stronger version of yourself. Dan's actions, however, showed he was trapped in an illusion of his own image, unable to escape the spiral of his downfall. Finally, Dan Bilzerian's story reminds us of the importance of building sustainable value in a world full of fleeting distraction. The social media era where Dan once reigned is one where likes and attention can vanish overnight. He bet everything on maintaining his image, but when the truth was exposed, he had nothing to hold on to. In contrast, those who invest in knowledge, kindness, and integrity always have a foundation to stand on, whether the spotlight fades or not. A career rooted in passion, a kind act, or a contribution to the community brings deeper fulfillment than any fleeting glamour. Dan Bilzerian's story is a powerful warning about the traps of the digital age, where image can easily outshine truth, but only for a short time. From a celebrated icon, he became a living testament to the fragility of fame built on lies and irresponsibility. His journey teaches us that true success lies not in glamour or external validation, but in timeless values: integrity, responsibility, autonomy, and meaning. Only by living true to these values can we build a life worth living, undazzled by fleeting glory and unshaken by the tide of truth. Dan Bilzerian has completely lost the trust and admiration of those who once idolized him. I miss the old Dan Bilzerian. When I thought he was an icon, a former fan wrote on X. Now I just see a guy trying to cling to faded glory. The way Dan handled criticism with arrogance and a lack of transparency only deepened public disappointment. This guy, whose entire brand was "Look at me, losers, my life is so much better than yours," turns out to be the biggest loser. How adorable, another comment sarcastically remarked. Though he still has a small group of loyal followers, Dan will never reclaim his status as an icon. The Mogul image is now overshadowed by accusations of fraud, empty flaunting, and unanswered questions about the origins of his wealth. Like every empire built on sand, it all collapsed when the wave of truth came crashing in. Dan's story proves that in a world where a single photo can make you famous overnight, the truth remains the most patient player, waiting to expose the core no matter how desperately you try to hide it. When the lights go out and the audience leaves, all that remains is an empty stage and a man facing himself in the dark. From the peak of the king of Instagram to a figure